A carriage rolled down a quiet road. Inside, a man held an old letter. Its writing faded, but still readable. He muttered the name to himself, Militar. It brought back memories. He thought about the people he had left behind, the work he used to do, and the town he once called home. All of it felt like a lifetime ago. A few weeks earlier, in the town of Ritten, everything had changed. Dirate stood inside the Blacksmith Guild, barely able to process what he had just heard. What? Expelled? Why? The guildmaster, Shyon, stood firmly between two young women, showing no sympathy. He told Dirate he was a waste, that he brought no benefits to the guild. Dirate tried to ask for a clearer explanation, but Shyon dismissed him without hesitation and ordered him to leave. Overwhelmed, Dirate gathered what little he had and walked out. As he left, Shyon flashed a sinister smile behind his back and muttered a single word, NR. Dirate understood it immediately. No return. Don't come back. The door closed behind him, and with it, 30 years of his life. As he walked, a child leaned out of a passing carriage, clutching a toy that Dirate had repaired not long ago. The boy's face lit up, and he called out to him, "Thanks, old man." His mother smiled fondly beside him. Dirate watched them go. He thought about his age, about how he had spent 3 decades as a blacksmith since he was 10 years old, and how he had nothing to show for it except calloused hands and an empty road ahead. Those small moments, fixing toys for the local children, had been some of his happiest. Then he remembered the letter. Militar, a child he had once looked after, had written to him from the capital, inviting him to come. He decided this was his chance. Maybe getting expelled was a good opportunity after all. He traveled by third-class carriage to the royal capital of Glossa, a journey that took several weeks. The capital was nothing like Ritten. It was loud, crowded, and overwhelming. In the market, a stall owner offered him some borax roast. Dirate took a bite and told the man it was delicious. The owner asked where he was from, and Dirate admitted he came from Ritten and had been expelled from his guild. The stall owner gave him extra heart meat, telling him to eat up and cheer up. While he ate, he overheard a commotion nearby. A woman was arguing with a young male merchant about a sword she had purchased. She said the blade had broken the moment she used it against monsters. The merchant shot back that she just did not know how to use it properly. People gathered around, whispering about the merchant's shady reputation. Dirate set down his food and pushed through the crowd to get a closer look. He picked up the broken sword and examined it carefully, his blacksmith instincts kicking in. Something was wrong with the blade, and his expression hardened as he began to piece together what the merchant had done. Dirate confronted the merchant directly, telling him that lying was not acceptable. He held up the broken falchion and explained to the crowd that it was made from tin pseudo-ore, a cheap D-rank material, not the steel ore the merchant had been advertising. The merchant's face twisted with panic and defiance as he denied the accusation. Dirate showed the crowd the wavy pattern on the blade, a telltale sign of tin pseudo-ore, and compared it to the straight pattern that real steel ore would have. He asked the merchant plainly whether he ever thought about the people who relied on his weapons. The crowd murmured in agreement. Other professionals nearby confirmed the blacksmith's accusations matched their own suspicions. He told the merchant he was ashamed to call him a fellow blacksmith and demanded he take responsibility for what he had sold. The merchant sneered and dismissed him as just an old man. But then things turned violent. The merchant pulled a knife and lunged at Dirate, screaming at him to stop preaching. Dirate told the bystanders to fall back. Before the blade could reach him, a figure with flowing blonde hair stepped in and ordered the merchant to stop. Her voice carried military authority, and the crowd gasped. She disarmed the merchant with swift precision, a hand chop and an elbow strike, and soldiers moved in to restrain him. The people breathed a sigh of relief, recognizing her as a commander of the Glossa army. Dirate thanked her, though he felt awkward and out of place standing next to someone so impressive. He worried about how he must have looked, just some unemployed old man causing a scene. But the military officer stared at him with a warm expression and asked if he remembered her. He did. Somewhere deep down, he remembered a little girl who used to play with a toy sword he had crafted years ago. "You're the teacher, right? The blacksmith from Ritten?" She smiled wide. "Don't you remember me? I'm Militar." He could barely believe it. The child he had once made toys for was now a military commander. They stood there, both struck by how much time had passed and how much had changed. Militar gestured toward the sword at her side, hinting that it held a connection to their shared past. Dirate held the sword in his hands. It was called the Divine Magic Sword Shinma, an S-rank weapon with a holy attribute. He was stunned to hear it was considered a national treasure. Militar told him it was made by his own hands. He shook his head, sweating, insisting he did not remember making anything like it. She explained that the toy sword he had crafted for her as a child had evolved over the years into this weapon. He could not believe what he was hearing. Neither of them had ever seen anything like it before. A memory surfaced of young Militar clutching that little wooden sword and how it had slowly changed shape as she grew. She believed the weapons he made had the power to evolve, shaped by the feelings of the person who wielded them. She then told him about her past in written. The town had a wasteful culture because of its wealthy adventurers, and it had been difficult for her growing up. Before they could finish talking, a red-haired innkeeper approached Dorate. She thanked him for exposing the fraudulent merchant earlier and invited him to stay at her inn in the East District as repayment. Militar pulled Dorate away before he could respond, clearly eager to continue their conversation. Meanwhile, back at the written Blacksmith Guild, Shyon stood in front of a mirror, admiring himself and boasting about how handsome he was. He had no idea what was happening in the capital, and no sense of what he had lost by getting rid of Dorate. His arrogance left him completely blind to the truth. Shyon kicked off the morning meeting at the guild, pleased that Dorate was gone. He remarked that the atmosphere felt fresher without him. The guild members greeted him with the usual respect, but the meeting was interrupted when Senji, a royal messenger, arrived with armed guards. Shyon was caught off guard as Senji asked for the whereabouts of Master Dorate. The question annoyed him. His eyebrow twitched as he demanded to know why anyone from the royal palace would be looking for someone he considered useless. Senji identified himself as a messenger from the queen and explained that Dorate's expertise was needed for a serious matter. Shyon's frustration boiled over. He told Senji he had expelled Dorate, calling him a useless fool who drained the guild's resources. Senji was stunned. He could not understand how Shyon could have discarded a craftsman recognized by royalty so casually. Back in the capital, Militar sat across from Dorate in a high-end cafe, smiling warmly. Dorate glanced at the menu and felt his stomach drop at the prices. He ordered the cheapest tea, painfully aware of how little money he had. At the guild, Shyon's jealousy reached its peak. He barged into the conversation between Senji and his escorts, demanding to be recognized as more important than Dorate. He forced open a box Senji had brought, revealing the angelic sword, Amitsurugi, an S-rank holy weapon. For a moment, even Shyon was mesmerized by its beauty, but he quickly snapped back to his arrogant self, refusing to accept that Dorate could have created something so extraordinary. Senji tried to explain the significance of Dorate's work, but Shyon would not hear it. He was too consumed by pride and jealousy to see what was right in front of him. Back at the guild, the discussion about the Amitsurugi continued. Senji explained that the sword had evolved over time and that the queen herself had ordered them to find Dorate immediately. Shyon scoffed, asking if they were mocking him, but Senji was dead serious. In a burst of arrogance, Shyon declared he would fix the sword himself. Senji warned him that only Dorate could repair it, but Shyon brushed him off, insisting that as guildmaster, he was always the best craftsman in the building. He examined the chipped blade and announced he would sharpen it, confident he had mastered the technique. The truth was, he had never sharpened a sword in his life. Everything he knew came from watching others work. A loud crash echoed from Shyon's work area. The people outside exchanged worried looks, and someone asked if Senji was all right after hearing the noise. Inside, Shyon stood frozen in panic. The blade had snapped. He stared at the broken pieces, unable to comprehend what had just happened. He was the one who broke it, a national treasure, shattered by his own hands. That was a monumental crime. He began to spiral, sweating and muttering to himself about what to do. In desperation, he grabbed a temporary adhesive and tried to glue the blade back together. When he stepped out, someone complimented how quickly he had finished, assuming a guildmaster would naturally be fast. Shyon tried to play it off, assuring everyone the sword was repaired, but when Senji examined it, he noticed a nick in the blade. Shyon snapped at him, telling him not to make accusations without proof, and suggesting the damage must have happened during transportation. The tension in the room was thick. No one believed him, but no one dared say it outright. As Senji pressed further, asking whether Shyon had truly fixed it, Shyon's composure crumbled. He stood there sweating, unable to form a response. The guild members watched from the background, frozen in place. Shyon mumbled that he thought he had repaired it properly, his face twisted with confusion and dread. There was nothing to recall. The man had never known what he was doing in the first place. Senji bent over and inspected the sword more closely. His expression darkened. He turned on Shyon, demanding to know what he had done. "What did you do? You fool!" The accusation hit Shyon like a wall. Senji could not believe he had trusted this man with a national treasure. Shyon tried to deflect, mumbling that it was rude to speak to a guild master that way, but it was too late. A voice cut through the room. "Shyon, you're under arrest." The color drained from his face. Meanwhile, in the capital, Durate sat across from Militar in the cafe, casually mentioning that he had been kicked out of his guild. Militar paused mid-bite, stunned. She could not believe that the guildmaster had actually expelled a craftsman of Durate's caliber. She called Shyon the epitome of incompetence. The words "fake master" hung in the air between them. Back in Written, a carriage sat outside the guild. Shyon now stood under guard, flanked on both sides with nowhere to run. Everything had fallen apart so quickly. His fists clenched at his sides, and one thought burned through his mind. This was all Durate's fault. If that man had still been around, none of this would have happened. Shyon swore he would get his revenge, no matter what it took. While Shyon sat in custody, back in Written, Durate's new chapter was just beginning. Militar led him through the back alleys of the capital toward the Grossa army headquarters, apologizing along the way for dragging him into her request. As they approached the base, Durate stopped and stared. The blacksmith facility alone was massive, easily twice the size of his old guild. He could not help but be impressed. Inside, soldiers straightened up and saluted as Militar passed. She excused herself briefly and returned with her companion in tow. The soldiers eyed Durate with curiosity, whispering among themselves about who he was. Militar introduced him directly, announcing that this was Durate, the creator of the magic sword Shinma. The room went quiet for a moment, then erupted in murmurs. Some soldiers were astonished. Others were openly skeptical, muttering that he looked like just some old man and wondering if the commander had been scammed. Militar asked where Nanahikari was, but he had already finished his tasks for the day and disappeared. The soldiers sighed. This was apparently a regular occurrence. They explained that Nanahikari was the sole son of a major donor to the national army, the Filgrand family, and that his influential background made it nearly impossible for anyone to complain about his attitude or his sloppy work. Militar made it clear she had no patience left for him and wanted Durate to demonstrate what real skill looked like. Nanahikari finally strolled in, dressed in expensive clothes that had no business being anywhere near a forge. With a sneer, he remarked on how stuffy the place was, completely indifferent to the tension in the room. A casual smile sat on his face as he greeted everyone, either unaware or unconcerned that the entire facility had been talking about his incompetence. Then, he tossed a sword carelessly to a soldier, who caught it and immediately looked unhappy with the quality of the repair. Durate stepped forward and scolded Nanahikari for throwing an unsheathed blade so recklessly. The sword itself was poorly maintained, confirming everything the soldiers had been saying. Nanahikari sat down with a smug look on his face, unbothered. Nanahikari held a hand to his face, annoyed that the soldier was not grateful for his work. He snapped at the man, demanding to know why he had such a long face when Nanahikari had gone out of his way to fix his weapon. Then, he grabbed the soldier by the front of his shirt, getting aggressive. The soldier froze, too intimidated to fight back. Before it could go any further, Durate grabbed Nanahikari's arm and held it firm. The grip was strong enough to leave a mark. Looking Nanahikari dead in the eye, Durate told him plainly that if he was going to call himself a blacksmith, he needed to fix things properly. Nanahikari was caught off guard. No one had ever stopped him like that before. Militar stepped in to cool things down. She told Nanahikari to calm himself and introduced Durate as the blacksmith who forged Shinma. Nanahikari's eyes went wide. He stammered, barely able to get the words out. Militar suggested that since they were both blacksmiths, they should work together as a team, but the suggestion only made things worse. Nanahikari's pride would not allow it. Instead, he challenged Durate to a blacksmith duel. The rules were simple, but deeply unfair. They would each forge a sword, and the blades would be tested on training dummies. The first sword to break would lose, but Nanahikari added a condition. Durate could only use the materials already available in the facility, which were D rank or lower. Nanahikari, meanwhile, would use his family's S rank materials. Durate agreed without hesitation, smiling as if the terms did not bother him at all. A young soldier named Konfi was chosen to wield the sword during the test. The others looked worried, but Durate seemed energized by the challenge. With a steady voice, he promised Konfi he would forge a sword that would never lose. Militar and Konfi both looked relieved by his confidence. The duel was set for 10 days. Durate looked around the forge and cracked his knuckles. Even with D-rank materials, he said, he could create something exceptional. He was ready to get to work. Durate stood at the forge, sweat already forming on his brow. The blueprint for the sword existed only in his mind, shaped by 30 years of experience. Militar watched from the doorway, quietly checking in on his progress. He swung the hammer with a rhythm that felt natural, almost musical. It had only been a few weeks since he last held one, but it felt like it had been far longer. The excitement of working again made every strike feel alive. Militar noticed the sound and remarked on how pleasant it was. The ores went in next, copper and tin in a precise ratio, heated and folded with the kind of focus that only comes from decades of repetition. The joy of forging surged through him, and for the first time in a long while, he felt truly like himself. After a week, the body of the sword was complete, gleaming silver and perfectly shaped, but Durate was not finished. He pulled out a minor thunder magic stone and realized it could dramatically enhance the blade's sharpness. He told Militar to stay away for the next 3 days. What came next would be dangerous. For 3 days and 3 nights, he worked without stopping, enduring waves of pain as the thunder magic released from the stone. Every muscle screamed, but he pushed through it all, determined to forge the ultimate weapon for Konfi. When it was over, the sword sat on the anvil, crackling with faint electricity. Militar returned and congratulated him. She asked if it was already finished, and he told her that 30 years of experience had a way of speeding things up. Then they checked the sword's rank, and both of them froze. It was S rank. Neither of them could believe it. A sword forged from D rank materials had reached the highest tier. Militar called everyone over to see. Konfi rushed in and asked if the sword was really done. Durate held it up and told him its name, Kamina, the Thunder Emperor's demon-slaying sword. S rank, lightning attribute, with cutting power unlike anything they had seen. He warned Konfi to handle it carefully. Konfi stared at the blade in awe, barely able to speak. Militar told him to honor the effort Durate had poured into this weapon by living up to the faith placed in him. Without hesitation, the young soldier agreed, his nerves replaced by determination. Then, Militar made an announcement. She would personally oversee Konfi's training to prepare him for the duel. Her eyes burned with resolve. A grin spread across Konfi's face as he straightened up and promised he was ready. The crowd around them buzzed with anticipation. The duel was coming, and for the first time, the soldiers believed they might actually see Nanahikari lose. With Kamina complete and the duel just days away, there was no time to waste. Konfi stood holding the sword with a nervous grip, while Durate stood confidently beside him. The training was about to begin, but across the capital, at the Nanahikari estate, a very different scene was unfolding. Nanahikari stormed into his mansion, furious about his arm. He shouted about how the old man had nearly broken it, cursing Durate's rough handling as he clutched the reddened skin. His maid was called in to examine the injury. Despite her calm and unsettling demeanor, she inspected the arm carefully and declared there was no real injury. Nanahikari could not believe it. He demanded she look again, but the answer did not change. There was no evidence to use in a lawsuit. Furious, he shifted his focus to revenge through the duel. The family vault held S-rank materials, and he began listing them off. Full metal, Thunder Godstone, Earth Dragon's reverse scale, Platinum Steel, and Eternal Flamestone. Servants were ordered to take them to a top blacksmith guild in the kingdom and commission the finest sword money could buy. Nanahikari grumbled the entire time, determined to crush Durate with overwhelming resources. Before the maid left, he warned her not to tell his parents about any of it, since they were away from the estate. Back at the army base, the real preparation was underway. Militar took charge of Konfi's training, pushing him hard from the start. She emphasized that his sword must not break, and drilled defensive maneuvers into him relentlessly. Konfi responded with enthusiasm, eager to learn. Militar struck first, telling him to learn through physical experience, which shocked the onlookers watching from the sidelines. She taught him to use the blade's edge for blocking, and Konfi began to catch on quickly. He focused on consistent blocking as they sparred, and by the end of the session, he was applying her advice with growing confidence. He turned to Militar for feedback, and the improvement was already visible. Militar did not let up. During one round, she scolded Konfi for dropping his guard mid-fight, asking if he was trying to get himself killed. Konfi flinched, apologized, and agreed to start over. The match was called, and Durate watched from the side, impressed but sweating. He thought to himself what a firecracker Militar was, reflecting on how intense the training had become from the very first day. When the session ended, Konfi lay on the ground, gasping for breath. He thanked Militar with everything he had, barely able to get the words out between breaths. Militar stood over him and told him that starting tomorrow, he would train with Kamina itself. She turned to Dorate and asked him to prepare the sword. He nodded, though a hint of nervousness crossed his face. Later, in the dining area, the group sat down to eat together. The mood was lighter now. Some soldiers admitted they had been watching the training from the shadows, and Comfy turned red, shouting in embarrassment that he had no idea they were spying. His friends teased him, and one of them complimented his performance despite his small size. Comfy objected to being called tiny, but the laughter continued. As the meal wound down, one of the soldiers mentioned leaving early the next day. Comfy stood up to head out, and a peer stopped him to say not to catch a cold. Comfy was caught off guard by the concern. Dorate noticed the exchange quietly, watching from across the room. That night, Comfy was out training alone under the stars. Dorate found her there, confirming his suspicion about where she had gone. During a swift move, she nearly lost her balance, but recovered quickly. When she noticed him, she greeted him warmly. He asked if training this late was normal for her. She admitted it was part of her effort to catch up with someone she admired deeply. Dorate had come to check on her, concerned about how hard Militar had been pushing the training. They talked about Kamina. Comfy admitted she was afraid of breaking the sword, given how much effort had gone into making it. Dorate reassured her, marveling alongside her at the blade's incredible properties. When the conversation wound down, he told her to take care of herself and headed back inside, satisfied that she was doing well. As he walked away, Comfy stood under the night sky, feeling grateful for the support. The bond between them was growing stronger with each passing day. Dorate walked down the quiet street that night with a confident stride. He had decided to fine-tune Kamina before the duel, wanting every detail to be perfect. He whistled softly under the stars, already planning the adjustments in his head. 4 days later, at the Nanahikari estate, the commissioned sword finally arrived. The guildmaster delivered it personally, trembling as he presented it. Nanahikari took one look, and his expression turned cold. The sword was called Solid Sword, a rank, no attributes. He had given them 5 S-rank materials, and this was what they produced. He demanded an explanation. The guildmaster stammered that S-rank materials were extremely difficult to work with, and that this was the best they could manage in the time given. Nanahikari erupted. He screamed at the guildmaster to get out. The man begged for payment, but Nanahikari refused, threatening to make him pay with his life instead. The guildmaster fled without another word. Nanahikari had destroyed the letter the guild had sent earlier, which might have explained the sword's limitations, but he did not care. In his mind, none of it mattered. To make up for the disappointing sword, Nanahikari called in reinforcements. A large, sturdily built man named Detroit entered the room, introduced as the iron-fisted wrecker. Once informed about the duel and the failed S-rank commission, Detroit was unfazed. Rank did not matter, he declared, and proved it by bending a metal bar with his bare hands. Nanahikari watched with a satisfied smirk. This was no longer just about winning the duel through a better sword. He wanted a one-sided beatdown. He wanted Dorate humiliated. Before leaving, Nanahikari quietly instructed Eigen to keep everything hidden from his parents. She responded with her usual emotionless composure, assuring him it would remain their secret. The day of the forge-off had arrived. The duel ground was set. Nanahikari arrived with a taunting grin, greeting Dorate as old man and giving him credit for not running away after 10 days. Eigen stood silently at his side. Across the field, Dorate, Militar, and Comfy watched with tension on their faces. The crowd murmured with anticipation as the blacksmithing duel was officially announced. Both sides took their positions. Nanahikari smirked confidently as he revealed his weapon, the solid sword. Observers whispered, curious about what Comfy was carrying. When Dorate's side revealed Kamina, the S-rank thunder sword, doubt and surprise rippled through the crowd. Some were incredulous, dismissing it as a trick. Others stared in disbelief at the electric charge crackling along the blade. On Nanahikari's side, Detroit, the massive iron-fisted wrecker, stood ready to wield the solid sword. He smirked at the sight of Comfy, mocking her as a little girl. The rules were simple. The duel ended if a sword broke or left the ring. The judge called the start, and the fight exploded into action. Detroit swung with devastating power, creating a shockwave of wind pressure that stunned the crowd. Spectators shielded their eyes from the force. He mocked Comfy for dodging instead of attacking, pushing her with relentless aggression. Comfy kept moving, looking for her moment. The soldiers watching shouted their support, calling out for the captain who trained her and for Dorate who forged her sword. When Detroit demanded she surrender, Comfy refused. She gripped Kamina tighter and stood her ground. Comfy's eyes burned with determination. She shouted that she was not going to lose. Lightning crackled around Kamina as the two fighters clashed in the massive courtyard. The crowd watched in stunned silence, their eyes wide with shock and awe. The energy in the air was electric. Then it happened. In a single strike, Kamina sliced clean through the solid sword without a sound. The blade cut so fast and so cleanly that for a moment, no one even realized what had occurred. The training dummy on Nanahikari's side was destroyed instantly. One bystander whispered about how terrifying the sharpness was. The courtyard fell silent. Derate stood on the sideline, sweating, muttering to himself that maybe he had overdone it. Militar appeared beside him, beaming. "You did it, teacher!" The judge declared Confi the winner, and the crowd erupted into cheers. Soldiers shouted their admiration, praising Confi's incredible performance and Derate's craftsmanship, but Nanahikari could not accept it. He screamed at anyone who tried to congratulate his opponent, telling them to shut up. He declared he was quitting as the military blacksmith and threatened to sue everyone involved. Before he could say another word, Eigen stepped forward and knocked him out cold with a single hand chop to the neck. She turned to the crowd, bowed, and calmly apologized for her young master's behavior, promising to reprimand him further. Then, she dragged him away without another word. Later, Detroit sat alone, demoralized. A girl wielding a sword forged from D-rank materials had beaten him. There was nothing left to say. He resolved to live a quiet life from now on. Meanwhile, Eigen maintained her stoic composure as she informed Nanahikari of what she had done. She told him she had disclosed everything to his parents, including his unauthorized use of the family's S-rank materials. The look on Nanahikari's face said it all. He knew what was coming. Nanahikari called Eigen a traitor, screaming at her as she stood there unmoved. But before he could do anything else, the door opened and his parents walked in. His eyes went wide with fear. The Duke and Duchess Fjellgren radiated fury. His mother demanded to know why he would tarnish their family name. The Duke roared at him for using materials that had been set aside for another nation without permission. Nanahikari tried to explain, stammering and reaching out to them, but they would not hear it. The Duke ordered preparations for his exile. Nanahikari begged them to reconsider, shouting for them to wait, calling out to his mother and father, but they had already turned their backs. A carriage took him east and abandoned him in Tumon Forest, a monster-infested wilderness far from the capital. Alone in the dark woods, he shook with fear. They had actually sent him here. The sounds of creatures closing in made him scream, begging whatever was out there to stay away. In the silence that followed, a memory surfaced. Derate's face, the duel, the jealousy that had driven him to act the way he did. He wished he had been honest with himself. He wished he had asked to learn instead of trying to destroy, but it was too late for that now. Back at the army base, the mood could not have been more different. Militar commended Confi for the incredible performance that brought honor to the army. Derate modestly brushed it off, saying he had merely made the sword and that Confi was the one who gave everything. Young Confi stood there beaming with pride as soldiers crowded around to celebrate. The excitement was infectious, and everyone was talking about what the future held. Militar stepped forward and announced to the gathered crowd that Derate was being appointed as the army's new exclusive blacksmith. The soldiers cheered, calling him Old Man, with nothing but affection and respect. The rain could not dampen their spirits as they shouted their approval. In the distance, the castle of the Glossa Kingdom loomed against the sky. Somewhere inside, a voice whispered from behind walls, pleading to be let out. Inside the castle, Shyon sat behind bars, shouting at anyone who would listen. He demanded to negotiate, raging about how he was being treated. A guard sighed, clearly used to the noise by now. Senji arrived, and the guards greeted him. He pressed a mechanism on the wall and commanded Shyon to move. The formerly defiant guildmaster suddenly went quiet, nervous under Senji's cold stare. Meanwhile, at the army forge, Derate was surrounded by eager soldiers waiting to have their weapons repaired. One thanked him, saying his sword handled perfectly after Derate's work. Another asked about shoulder guards. Derate kept his composure amid the crowd, reminding everyone he was doing repairs in order. His title was now proudly displayed: Glossa Army Exclusive Blacksmith Derate. Between jobs, young soldiers peered through the window to watch him work, admiring his technique. Kamina sat on display in the facility, and Confi stared at it with awe, declaring it was the coolest thing she had ever seen. She vowed to train harder to become truly worthy of wielding it. The sword had become a symbol of achievement, and the younger soldiers were fired up with ambition because of it. Derate overheard soldiers talking about Militar's legendary feat of defeating one of the Demon Lord's 4 heavenly kings. He noted with quiet satisfaction that his swords were being treated with such respect. As the day wound down, a soldier said he wanted to be as cool as that old man someday. Derate chuckled at the nickname, but called it a day, telling everyone to come back tomorrow. Militar found him as he was closing up. She thanked him for his hard work and told him the soldiers had changed for the better since he arrived. Durate said that knowing his work mattered was what made being a blacksmith worthwhile. They discussed the Queen's policy of keeping repairs moderate, ranked C or B for general troops, to prevent soldiers from becoming complacent. Militar agreed it was a sound approach. Then, her tone shifted. She looked at him seriously and said the Queen wished to see him immediately. Durate froze. Right now? Militar confirmed. The color drained from his face as he asked why the Queen of all people would want to meet a commoner like him. Militar was already pulling him along, and his protest echoed behind them as they headed toward the palace. Durate could barely keep his composure as they approached the palace. He was praised for raising soldier morale and preventing the army from weakening, which was apparently considered a major contribution, but none of that calmed his nerves. A commoner meeting the Queen was beyond anything he had ever imagined. Militar tried to reassure him along the way, explaining that Queen Serenade Grossa was kind to those who were capable but ruthless toward incompetence. That did not exactly put him at ease. Inside the palace, Senji stood before the Queen and confessed his role in the situation with Shyon. He admitted he had been deceived by Shyon's smooth talking and had failed to recognize the man's incompetence. The Queen's response was immediate and harsh. She scolded Senji for his failure and delivered a physical punishment with a leather whip. Senji accepted it without resistance, groaning but standing firm. Her anger then turned to Shyon. She tore into him for breaking the national treasure sword, Amitsurugi, and for his deception. She stripped him of his position as guildmaster of Written on the spot. Shyon's face went white. He pleaded desperately, but no words could save him. Guards held him in place as the Queen delivered her judgment. Meanwhile, Durate and Militar arrived at the palace gates. Durate muttered that he wished he had more time to prepare himself mentally. Militar reminded him again that the Queen valued competence above all else. When they entered the throne room, Durate knelt before Queen Serenade Grossa. She was exactly as Militar had described: silver hair, star-like eyes, and an authority that filled the entire room. The Queen acknowledged his exceptional work on Kamina and Shinma, calling him the foremost blacksmith in the kingdom. Durate was stunned. He responded with humility, stammering that he had only done what he could. The Queen's expression softened. She found genuine amusement in his awkwardness, and a light laughter passed between her, Durate, and Militar, adding a moment of warmth to the otherwise tense audience. The Queen then brought up the Amitsurugi. She asked Durate if he remembered it. Confusion crossed his mind. He apologized, admitting he had no memory of making such a sword. The Queen explained that it was an S-rank holy weapon with the ability to summon celestial beings and connect the mortal world to the heavenly realm. It had evolved from something Durate had once crafted, just like Shinma and Kamina. The revelation stunned him. He had no idea the sword had become something so significant, and he said as much, apologizing again. The Queen laughed at his honest bewilderment. Then, she entrusted him with the sword's restoration. Durate hesitated, unsure if he was up to the task. Before he could fully process the request, the doors opened and Shyon was dragged in, disheveled and pitiful. Durate and Militar both reacted with surprise at the sight of him. The Queen explained that this was the man who had destroyed the Amitsurugi by attempting a repair he had no skill to perform. Shyon knelt on the floor, frustrated and humiliated. The Queen turned to Durate and asked him to take Shyon as his apprentice. Shyon exploded in protest, ranting about how he refused to serve someone he considered incompetent, using his usual jargon-filled language. The Queen silenced him with another crack of the whip, telling him to fix the way he spoke because no one could understand him. Senji was then formally introduced as the supervisor who would monitor Shyon and ensure he caused no trouble for Durate. Senji bowed and assured Durate he would keep things under control. Despite his reservations, Durate agreed to the arrangement with a reluctant nod. As the audience concluded, the group prepared to leave. Shyon's displeasure was written all over his face. Durate, exhausted from the whole ordeal, suggested they head back to the inn. His muscles ached and his mind was overloaded. Senji offered to escort them. Durate declined any offer of better lodging at the army base, insisting that the inn he was staying at suited him just fine. They arrived at the East District. Durate called out as they reached the building, announcing he was back. Teru rushed to the entrance, her face lighting up. She scolded him gently for coming home so late and told him she had been worried. Before Durate could explain, Militar stepped forward and declared she would be staying at the inn from today as well. Teru's eyes went wide with surprise. Militar repeated it with a confident smile, and Teru stared at her, stunned. Teru quickly recovered and offered to prepare a room right away. Militar suggested they eat first, since they had company. The moment was interrupted when Shyon burst through the door, shouting about why Durate got all the special treatment and demanding to stay as well. Teru looked him up and down and flatly told him the inn was fully booked. The only thing available was the stable out back. Shyon protested, insisting he was a former guildmaster and deserved better. Senji grabbed him by the collar and dragged him away toward the stable across the river, charging him 1 silver coin per night. Shyon's screams of outrage faded into the distance as the others watched him go. Later that evening, Militar asked Durate if he was free the following night, hinting at plans for just the two of them. Durate blinked, caught off guard by the suggestion. The next morning, Durate arrived at the National Army headquarters and was greeted warmly by soldiers and blacksmiths alike. They told him they had heard all about his audience with the Queen and praised him eagerly. One soldier quietly mentioned that breaking a national treasure would normally mean execution, and that Shyon should be grateful for Her Majesty's mercy. The conversation turned to the repair of the Amitsurugi. Materials were brought out and presented to Durate: steel ore, lava rock, aqua stone, and hardened demon stone. A soldier explained their value and mentioned that these had been hidden from his predecessor, the implication being that materials of this quality were better suited to someone with Durate's skill. Durate looked them over carefully. The work ahead was going to be challenging, but the anticipation in the room was already building. Everyone wanted to see what the kingdom's top blacksmith could do. The blacksmiths gathered around the materials, admiring their quality. They expressed their gratitude and eagerness to see them put to good use. Several asked if they could stay and observe while Durate worked. He agreed, and the workshop filled with curious onlookers. Durate examined the broken Amitsurugi carefully. The craftsmanship of his past self was undeniable. He held the blade and felt a surge of doubt. Could he really surpass what he had once made? For a long moment, the question hung in the air. Then, something clicked. He would surpass it. No question about it. The blacksmiths and soldiers around him reacted with excitement. Militar watched with admiration, and Shyon stood off to the side, looking disgruntled. Durate got to work. He used the steel ore, hard insect fossil, aqua stone, lava rock, and hardened demon stone, explaining each step of the process to the blacksmiths who were furiously taking notes. He demonstrated diagonal hammering for the hardened demon stone, a technique required because the material hardened with direct impact and had to be struck at an angle. When they asked how he applied the holy attribute, Durate paused. Honestly, he was not entirely sure. The key seemed to be putting genuine feelings into the work. The repair was completed faster than anyone expected. The result was the Amitsurugi Kai, an S-rank sword with the holy attribute, capable of summoning celestial beings and connecting the mortal world to the heavenly realm. Cheers erupted outside the workshop. The blacksmiths praised the speed and quality of the work, eager to learn more from him. Militar, enchanted by what she had witnessed, held Durate's hand and told him she wanted to stay with him forever. Durate, caught off guard by the attention, did not quite know how to respond. Then it was time to teach Shyon. Senji pushed him forward and told him to greet everyone. Shyon reluctantly complied, but quickly turned defiant, snapping that he refused to be bossed around. Durate handed him a hammer and had him practice swinging it to flatten a piece of scrap metal. Shyon had never held a hammer in his life, despite 30 years as a guildmaster. On his first swing, he smashed his own thumb. Pain shot through his hand, and the people around him could not help but laugh. Shyon erupted, shouting that they were mocking him. In a rage, he threw dirty liquid across the room, which only made things worse. Senji grabbed him and dragged him away for what he called education. Durate watched them go and sighed. He could see the road ahead with Shyon was going to be long and difficult. That evening, a celebration was held at a tavern in Durate's honor. A toast was raised to the new official armorer of the Glossa army. The room was full of cheer. Teru, arriving at the scene, looked around in confused disbelief, not expecting the sudden party. The tavern was lively. Teru was surprised to find everyone gathered there and asked what was going on. Militar, already holding a drink, greeted her with playful energy, calling her a dear friend. The group sat together, eating and drinking. When Militar downed her mug with impressive speed, someone shouted, "Commander!" in surprise. Another soldier slammed his drink down in mock challenge. The mood turned whimsical when someone pulled out a set of small figurines that had been made as caricatures of Durate. There was a younger version labeled for his 20s and a current version for his 40s. The soldiers laughed and raised their mugs, declaring this was the real way to drink. A playful competition broke out over the dolls, with one soldier grabbing a figure and shouting that he was up for the challenge, while another groaned that it was happening again. Someone pointed out how much work must have gone into making the figurines. The group agreed to let the person who made them enjoy the moment, noting that once the enthusiasm took over, it would not stop until bedtime. The conversation eventually settled into something more reflective. Durate, still humble, tried to brush off the praise. He said he was just doing his job as a blacksmith. One of the soldiers thanked him sincerely for creating such an incredible weapon, acknowledging the skill and effort behind it. Another brought up the idea of Dirate making a weapon for his own personal use. The group discussed how using his own creations could help him understand the perspective of the people who wielded them. Dirate went quiet for a moment, turning the thought over in his head. A personal weapon. It was something he had never really considered before. The idea of a personal weapon stayed with Dirate. Back at the workshop the next day, he examined a block of material with a contemplative look. One of the soldiers brought it up again, suggesting that Dirate should forge a weapon for himself. A small crowd had gathered, listening closely. The soldier emphasized that it was important for self-defense, and that it could even sharpen his smithing precision. Dirate listened thoughtfully and seemed to warm to the idea. The soldiers rallied behind it immediately. They told him they were all for it and offered to handle his weapon training themselves. Dirate thanked them, genuinely touched by their support. The moment was interrupted by a loud shout. Shyon stormed in, complaining that he could not agree with this and demanding a weapon of his own. He felt it was unfair that Dirate was getting all the attention. The people around barely reacted, exhausted by his outburst at this point. Senji appeared, told him to quit complaining, and dragged him off for training. Shyon hit the ground with a thud, and the room let out a collective sigh of relief. Dirate headed to the Grossa Army warehouse to pick his materials. Plenty of good options were in stock, and his excitement was obvious as he went through them. When someone asked why he was not using higher-ranked materials, Dirate shook his head. Low-rank materials were more than good enough for him, he said, and the better ones should be saved for the soldiers' weapons. The comment impressed the people around him. One of them told him he was an admirable person. Dirate brushed it off with a modest smile, slightly embarrassed. He joked with Militar as he finalized his selection, happy with what he had found. A curious crowd gathered as he prepared to start. They asked what kind of weapon he planned to make. Suggestions flew around: an axe, a club, maybe even a magic staff. Dirate thought it over and announced his decision. He was going to make a sword. Militar offered to teach him swordsmanship if he went with a sword, but Dirate hesitated, admitting a sword felt like a stretch for him. She was enthusiastic about it, but he could already picture how her training would go, imagining comically intense results. He reconsidered. Then it came to him. He held up a tool and said he had a better idea. Another person nearby agreed that the new choice would suit him more. Dirate announced it confidently: a hammer. The crowd reacted with surprise, eyes wide. The hammers blacksmiths used were essentially weapons already, he explained, and he had been swinging one for 30 years. Confidence was not the issue. When he demonstrated a hammering motion, the crowd immediately saw the logic. They praised him, calling it brilliant. He got to work, and it did not take long. When he held up the finished weapon and announced it was done, the crowd erupted. They shouted in amazement and told him how incredible it looked. Someone pointed out that it still needed a name. Dirate looked at it proudly, admitting even he had to say it turned out well. He said he had the perfect name in mind, and the crowd leaned in with anticipation. He called it the Dirate Hammer. The room went silent. A few people exchanged glances. Someone muttered that it was a terrible name, but Dirate was unfazed. He decided to go with it, and the others reluctantly accepted. At least the weapon itself was flawless, and it spoke for itself. S rank, holy attribute. It had the ability to transform infused magic into a devastating impact, as if a meteorite had collided with its target. Several weeks passed. Dirate trained at the second training ground, swinging his hammer with increasing precision. A companion praised his improvement, and Dirate thanked them cheerfully. He was getting the hang of it. During training, his sparring partner reminded him to be careful not to leave himself open when swinging the hammer down. Dirate acknowledged the advice. They discussed the hammer's dual function as both a weapon and a shield, and Dirate asked for more practice on defense. His partner agreed and pushed the pace. The early days of training had been brutal. Dirate had been so sore from the muscle pain that he could barely move, groaning through the aches. But that was behind him now. He told himself he was fine and pushed forward with determination. His smithing experience translated well to hammer combat, and his swings were becoming more fluid and controlled by the day. During a break, Dirate sat under a tree, reflecting on how hectic his life had become. Between forging and training, his days were fuller than they had been in years. Someone approached and remarked on his tireless effort, noting that the soldiers genuinely enjoyed having him around. It had been a fulfilling time, and Dirate appreciated every moment of it. He watched others train nearby, and when one of them called out to him to watch a move, he smiled warmly. His mind drifted. He thought about how different his life would have been if he had never received that letter from Militar. Everything he had now, the forge, the training, the friendships, none of it would have happened. Quietly, he hoped that these valuable days in this new land would continue for a long time. His reflection was cut short by urgent shouting. A messenger came sprinting toward them, breathless and panicked. He screamed that in Stone Tree Forest, there had been a sighting of an iron bear, a special abnormal specimen, an A-rank monster. D-Rate and Militar both froze, then shouted in unison, demanding to know what was going on. D-Rate and Militar moved quickly through the base. People were running in panic, shouting warnings about the monster. D-Rate looked at Militar with concern and asked her what exactly a special abnormal specimen was. She admitted she had not explained that to him yet. She described it as a type of monster with extremely high intelligence and ferocity. Unlike regular monsters, these specimens held a deep grudge against humans and would attack on sight. As she spoke, D-Rate pictured the kinds of creatures she was describing. The thought made his blood run cold. He muttered to himself that it sounded terrifying. Then, Militar turned to him and asked if he would come along with them. D-Rate's eyes went wide. A blacksmith on a monster hunt? That made no sense to him. But before he could protest further, the situation was already moving. Over at the academy, word had already spread. Inside a classroom, a teacher explained the sighting of the Iron Bear in Stone Tree Forest to a group of students. The creature wore metal armor and had a distinctive black ring-shaped mark around its neck. The teacher made sure every student understood the danger. This was not a drill. The threat was real, and everyone needed to be prepared. The expedition was announced shortly after. A soldier declared that D-Rate would be joining them on the hunt, and the crowd buzzed with excitement. The plan was to track the Iron Bear and verify whether its materials could be turned into weapons. Before they set off, the squad leader reminded everyone to stay sharp. He warned that special abnormal specimens had durable bodies that could repel ordinary attacks. With the order to move out, multiple wagons rolled across the open landscape towards Stone Tree Forest. A few hours later, the group arrived. The forest was dim and oppressive, with thick canopy blocking most of the light. One of the soldiers muttered that the place gave him chills. The leader ordered everyone to spread out and begin the search. D-Rate and his companions moved deeper into the trees, staying alert. Konfi admitted that actual combat made him nervous. D-Rate gave him a reassuring nod and confessed he was a little on edge himself. But he reminded Konfi that they had holy attribute weapons on their side, his D-Rate hammer and Militar's Shinma. That gave them a real advantage against this kind of monster. They discussed the path forward, trusting in each other's preparation. Others had tried and failed to deal with this creature before, but this time they had the tools for the job. As the group pushed forward, goblins burst out from behind the trees. One of the soldiers panicked and shouted that they were going to get eaten. D-Rate assessed the situation calmly. There might be a nest nearby, but there was no reason to engage in a full fight. No subjugation request existed for goblins, so they would just drive them off and keep moving. The goblins pressed in, snarling and swinging crude clubs. D-Rate shouted for Konfi and the others to get back, then stepped forward to deal with it himself. One of them called out to him in worry, but D-Rate was already moving. He swung the D-Rate hammer down hard against the ground. The impact sent a shockwave rippling outward, and the goblins went flying into the air. The force was devastating. Every goblin in range was tossed aside like nothing. Konfi and the others stared in awe. D-Rate grinned and said the training was really paying off. His companions praised him eagerly, amazed at how much he had improved in just a few weeks. D-Rate rubbed the back of his head, slightly embarrassed, and thanked them for the encouragement. With spirits high, the group pressed forward. Then, a strange sound echoed through the forest. Everyone froze. One of the soldiers asked what that noise was. D-Rate's expression turned serious, and he told everyone to stay alert and on guard. Whatever was out there, it was close. They advanced cautiously through the dense trees, visibility dropping with every step. D-Rate sensed something before he saw it. He shouted for everyone to dodge. A massive tree-like creature loomed above them, crashing through the canopy. D-Rate gripped his hammer and braced himself alongside Militar. Another fight was already upon them. The creature's attack sent rocks and debris flying. 3 of them barely avoided the edge of a cliff. One soldier gasped in shock, staring down at the steep drop. D-Rate called out, asking if everyone was all right. A shaken voice replied that they were fine, barely. He told them not to let their guard down. Then, the real threat appeared. A massive armored bear emerged from the tree line, its body covered in thick iron-like plating. One of the soldiers identified it immediately. The Iron Bear, the special abnormal specimen. It was enormous, far bigger than they had expected. D-Rate told Konfi to blow the signal whistle. Konfi's hands trembled, but he managed a nervous confirmation and raised it to his lips. Militar stepped forward without hesitation. She said she would take this one. Her voice was steady, her eyes locked on the beast. The moment she called out Shinma's name, the blade responded with a brilliant glow. One clean motion, and the sword was drawn, light pouring from the edge. "Draw!" she commanded, and the S-rank magic sword blazed to life. The Iron Bear roared. Militar stood her ground, sword raised, ready to meet the charge head-on. Everyone behind her held their breath. The clash was about to begin.